Hello, welcome back to Bad Teacher Podcast, where teachers struggle together. So let's go on the next episode where we're going to be breaking down very superficially a little bit of Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. The Wretched of the Earth text, originally written in French, typed by his wife, Josie. And so we will get a little bit further into this, but I want to start by reminding, now that I have a few more subscribers, what my background is kind of about. I chose this background because I look at myself and I want us white teachers, other people, to look at ourselves as one little raindrop or one little drop of the ocean, of the wave that kind of takes over what we would know as enlightenment, colonization, capitalism, etc. So the reason why you say, well, why the sun? I thought the light was good. And I, as you guys have been following me, know that we have to get away from that binary of the light as good and then the dark as inherently evil, because that just furthers the colonial notion of Black people then as evil and white people as good. I mean, we have terms like the Enlightenment, as if these scientific developments somehow liberated humanity. And as we see from a historical analysis, which we won't go into much today, but Fanon talks about it as, these scientific developments, like we talked about in Cicero with colonization, actually being utilized to further the project of domination of nations across the globe. And so if you think of white people as representing a very small number of human population, maybe 5-8%, and how we can deal with that history of violent domination in the world and colonization that European nations, our ancestors, have partook in, kind of like Jean-Paul Sartre in the preface of The Wretched of the Earth talks about, guilt can be the momentum that we need in order to fight, in order to act. So as a white person, our guilt can't stop there. Like, well, what do we do about it? That was in the past. I think part of healing for white people has to do with having that revolutionary spirit and being part of that movement, but not being a protagonist of that. So it's sitting in the dark. It's listening to the knowledges that have been silenced, have been placed in the dark. So we didn't learn those knowledges in our education system. Different schools learn different things, different teachers choose different things, but for the most part, as a general knowledge, you're not going to see the Wretched of the Earth in a curriculum by any means, or discourses on colonialism. And so not only are we asking ourselves this, why are we willing to put it in the curriculum, regardless of if we have permission or not? And then what are we willing to do outside of the classroom as well that works to contribute to the liberation of all, and especially Black and brown people in the United States and across the globe, and also the marginalized class of poor people who would also who white people would be included in that, who have been used as shields throughout history, poor white people, throughout history to perpetuate the dominant class's agenda. And so we all must be in this together. And so we're going to look at decolonization and see we're not going to get too much into this history. And so there was a mass decolonization movement across the globe in a national sense. And then, throughout this podcast, we'll get into that retrenchment and what being anti-colonial means or post-colonial means today. So again, we're not going to do that part quite yet, but that's the goal. And that's how I consider this work. Yeah, that no one has to pay for. But, I am on Patreon now. Oh, yeah. And like and subscribe and share this channel. But I am on Patreon now. Wasn't prepared to share that, though. So you can probably go to Patreon and look for Bad Teacher 319. Yeah, it's still working on the promotion part of it. And so Frantz Fanon, let's dig in. I want to show you what he looks like. Here's the guy we're talking about, Frantz Fanon. He is from the island of Martinique, the same island that I showed you with Aimé Césaire. So he's from that same island, and actually Aimé Césaire was his mentor and teacher there. He lived a life that I have been reading over and over and over for many years, and I learned something new all the time. He lived in many places. Algeria is where he was buried. He actually passed away in the United States, but yeah, I'm not gonna let's go in order. So he was born in 1925 and he died in 1961. He was only what, 36 years old, I want to say. He was young. It kind of tripped me out. I'm like, oh my God, he's my age, literally. Wow. Did way more than me though. Anyways, they call him, it's crazy. When you look up some of the sources, he said that he was an Algerian psychiatrist, but he wasn't Algerian. I'm not sure where they get that. Maybe he identifies as Algerian because he was there and he fought with the FLN to liberate Algeria from French colonialism. But yeah, he was Martinican. He also lived in Tunis for some time, and he got his degree, psychology degree in France, in Lyon, France. So, and he was married, so he has a baby mama. His first baby's mom's name was, let me look it up again. I forgot. It was Marielle, I think, or was that the daughter's name? He was from a middle-class family. I can't find it, of course. Anyways, I know that he has a daughter who's now a anti-colonial researcher. She sometimes is a visiting professor in California, Berkeley. He fought in World War II in the France colonial regime. And that's where he really realized, not only being in the Black Army, but just realizing what white people, unfair treatment of Black people in the military and the dehumanization directed towards them. So a daughter from previous relationship, Michel Fanon Mendes France. So here, I will show you a picture of her. Here's the daughter. And here's the wife, Josie. That's not her mom. They have a son together named Oliver Fanon, which there's Oliver Fanon. I'll share all this stuff with you. So that's her. That's this lady's son. And then he was married to her, I think, until his death at a very young age. And she passed in 1989, the year that I was born. And she was la militante effacée, so erased. And I'm always gonna talk about the wives, because I be saying like these wives get like lost, and we need to bring them back. And so while I am talking about the Wretched of the Earth, she was the one that typed this, and obviously I read the translated version for time's sake. I could probably read it in French. I'd have to look up a lot of words, and my brain, I don't want to do that because I got to get this episode out. So yeah, wanted to share some of that with you, those resources. And like, if you teach French, any of you teach French? I mean, I think if you teach history, literature, any of this science, psychology, I took a psychology class in high school. This Frantz Fanon, you can talk about it in many different, in science too. But if you teach French, there's no excuse to not read some of his works. As a teacher, and maybe even, I don't know if I want to promote the whole AI thing, but there's definitely ways to level text that I would suggest leveling it maybe, but definitely is vital to teach this and read his work. What else about him that I wanted to share? It's just like so much, y'all. Because how do you talk about somebody who did so much, in such a short period of time? I think I got it all. So yeah, his work's basically centering on the reality of an anti-colonial resistance movement that requires violent resistance. There's no way to get around being, steadfast in Marxism, sticking true to that glue, and and being anti-colonial, but also being moved to act and to be unified in this movement of resistance and to be organized and armed. And it's much more nuanced than that, but that's the general, the wretched of the earth needs to take up arms against its colonizer. And once those national projects happen, it won't be as if this is a post-colonial world, because capitalism's grips and corporate wealth has already been, well established long before the nationalization of all of these, former colonies of European countries. And so that fight must continue in order to completely, be unaligned, and the relationship to be of a mutual sort of relationship rather than a dominant or oppressed oppressor or dominant, inferior type of relationship. And the only way to do that is through violence, through a violent break of the colonial structure. And so I wanted to show you next a map of what decolonization looks like in map form. So in Africa, and if you notice, there's okay. We have Libya 1951. The fact that they have Israel on there is actually freaking disgusting and sick. They said they decolonized from 1948. This is why I can't handle some of these maps. India 1947, Pakistan 1947, Burma, Laos, Indonesia, Maldives from Britain, but you see all the former colonies, England, Equatorial Guinea from Spain, only Spanish. Well, see, right here, they still speak in the West Sahara, supposedly, let's not get into that, but Spanish is not a national language. I think it's more French. They have some Berber and Arabic there. But Equatorial Guinea still has a national language of Spanish. You can go and speak Spanish and people understand you. It's the only country in Africa like that. Ethiopia was never colonized. But you can see that, from this movement took place from as early as the, late 1940s, like in Syria, 1946, up until even the 70s and the 90s. Like Botswana was, well, that's 1966, but there was some that just gained independence recently as the 90s. I had a better map that I wanted to show you. Here it was this map. Again, doesn't share as much as the countries or all of that information, but you can see the years, right? So this is the 1990s. This is what I was talking about. They, decolonized from South Africa. Okay. So you can see the years. I wanted to show the years. I thought this was a good depiction of the years. 1966, 1910, 1960. Oh, because, yeah, from the Dutch, supposedly, when it became South Africa. So this is the context in which Frantz Fanon is speaking from. Here's Algeria right here. I'll show you. I'll just look that up so you guys can see. (1962). So here's Algeria. Tunisia is where he was sent when he fought for the French. He was actually being paid by France to be a doctor in Algeria, and then they realized, or he resigned because he was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not about to be part of the colonial project in Algeria. I'm going to fight with the freedom fighters, and that's what he did. So yeah, just showing you that. Um, so yeah, and then some of the things that I learned from reading Wretched of the Earth is we have a town in Iowa called Elkader, Iowa. And I didn't realize that Elkader, Iowa was named after Emil Abdelkader, who was an Algerian Islamic scholar, Sufi, and military leader who united Arab and Berber tribes to resist French colonization from 1832 to 1847. And so I didn't realize that Elkader, Iowa was named after this like Algerian freedom fighter from French colonists. Again, all the years that I was in school in Iowa, it's crazy. And it's right here. There's resources. You can read it. Forging a 170-year tie to a Muslim nation. There he is. And it is the only U.S. city named after a Muslim hero, and it's right here in Iowa. So it says more than 100 years before the Geneva Convention codified in international law the rights of prisoners of war and civilians to humane treatment, 19th century Algerian freedom fighter Abd al-Qadir ibn Muhi al-Din. Yeah, I need to learn Arabic. The leader of a revolt against French imperial rule in North Africa observed those rights more thoroughly than some modern combatants do. A devout practitioner of Sufism, a mystical tradition within Islam, the man better known as Emir Abd al-Qadir was so mindful of the safety of French soldiers and settlers captured by the army of Arabs and Berbers united under his command that colonial officials tried to suppress news of their enemies' high moral standards. And this is the case across history, including Israeli hostages in Palestine. Time and time again, there was this video circulating recently of Israeli girls like, we want to stay captive over here in Palestine. We're not even trying to go back. So there's many instances of the humane treatment from Arab nations to hostages, and that legacy of European nations humanely treating their captors is not there. Torture is there, rape is there, pretty much as the rule. So, that's what I'm saying. A way to heal from that is when I'm thinking of, all of the harm that my ancestors have done is to not only, be real about it and confront that truth and learn about that truth, but also then resist against that and fight. You participate in general strikes, you participate in boycotts, you participate in the education of the the dark side of history. You're critical of pardon image, you're critical of merit. You question things, and when people call you to fight, you fight. And we all have our own role to play. Like there's Algerian women freedom fighters would hide weapons in their dresses and carry knowledges with them that only they would know. So there's different ways to participate in violent acts of overthrowing dominant structures that are oppressive. But we all have a role to play for sure. So Frantz Fanon is writing at a time when there is thinking at a time when these decolonial efforts are happening, that are organized. African states, Asian states are being decolonized. So they're being nationalized, becoming their own independent nations. And as you saw on the map, and then in Latin America, we have a lot of socialist takeovers. For example, in Chile, we have Salvador Allende, taken over as in a peaceful socialist electoral type of political way. In Argentina, anywhere there was a coup, eventually in the 60s, there was coups, and there's always this like military repression of movements of decolonization. You know, for example, one that just was published, what colonists do is they fund, you know, let me share my screen so I can show you what I'm getting this from. They fund things like this from our tax dollars. So U.S. strikes a $58.6 billion deal for Patriot missiles with Lockheed Martin. The U.S. Army awarded Lockheed Martin in a contract worth up to this $1 billion to produce Patriot interceptor missiles, the Pentagon said, as conflicts in Iran and Ukraine strain U.S. weapon stockpiles, as if we can't just stop bombing these people. Like, what? In their schools, in their teachers, in their science, places of science, knowledge, universities, etc. So the previous deal was worth $4.7 billion, and that was in April. And so now this is a 7-year draft agreement, creating a multi-layer procurement plan for the interceptors through 2032. So yep, that's where your tax dollars are going. And if you thought they were going somehow back into, like I said, I don't even care what you thought you were before, but like if you take the side of the imperialists now that we have, you know, I guess this information has been here. I feel bad. I'm not even about to try even go into the argument because it's just not a good argument, but yeah. Okay. Let's go back to Frantz Fanon. See, it's like this is what I struggle with, is like how I'm making all these connections in my head, and like, how do I make them connected for you guys in a way that's succinct? It's difficult, I believe, all the time. Anyways, so before getting into, I think what's going to happen is the text is going to have to come next episode, like actually getting into the text, because this is just taking a lot to set up, which I think is important because I think teachers don't do that enough, right? It's like, well, let's get right into the text, and then people have no idea who's writing it, why they're writing it, what context they're writing it in, like 1984. It's like, if you're never looking at, you know, what is communism, what is socialism, what is all these political and social arrangements of society, then how do we even have a choice? You know, this is another thing that kind of, before I get to the Bandung Conference, I wanted to share this, and I'm going to send this to you, or you know what I mean, not send it, but on references. Attributes of political and economic. So this is something that we could have our students, you know, really try to understand, critique, like authoritarian communism, Richard Wolff would call state capitalism. So there's some issues with this as well. But just to kind of show you, so we are in fascist capitalism, oligarchy, extreme wealth concentration, corporate state fusion, authoritarian rule, suppression of oppression, of opposition, nationalism, you know, America first, chauvinism, that's patriarchy, militarism, as I just shared, Lockheed Martin, limited property rights, propaganda control. This is the buying up of the media by people like, you know, the Ellison family. Labor suppression and inequality is structural. And, you know, some people might argue that we're corporate capitalism, but either way, even if we're right here, we don't want that. We want to go all the way over here. So right now we have this democratic socialism thing going on. I actually wanted to talk a little bit more about this, the differences, but I don't think we'll have time. But this is a good little guide. And then I also heard a quote at the Green Party National Convention that I liked, and it was like, I'm not left or right. I'm at the bottom and I'm coming for the top. Yeah. So you could think of it like that too. But these conversations we should be having with our students nonetheless, because they're going to create the new Venn diagram for the possibilities that can exist. We are almost done. I wanted to end with the Bandung Conference, because I think that is important. And then, oh yeah, Mumia Abul Jamal. Let me share that right now. So I wanted to share with you Mumia Abdul Jamal. Oh gosh, they're doing too much. Here he is. So here is Mumia Abul Jamal, and he was accused of killing a police officer back in the 80s. So he's been in prison for over 45 years, I think. He's 72, currently born in 1954. And I want to put in some resources. This is a particular good one that I liked about his case and some information on him. The reason why I'm sharing him with Frantz Fanon is because he is doing his dissertation work on Frantz Fanon. So he is one of the experts. of Frantz Fanon. I think it was Huey Newton from the Black Panther Party. So Mumia Abul Jamal was in the Black Panther Party. He was also a journalist. And I believe Huey Newton, if I remember correctly, read Wretched of the Earth like 6 times. So this is a foundational text in the civil rights movement as well of the 1960s, which is what I'm trying to get us to see, of the connections of all of this is happening at literally the same time, but it's always so fragmented and disconnected that we can't make these connections for our students. And so therefore our students don't either. And then we continue to isolate this information as if it wasn't all happening at the same time. But when we do make these connections, woo, it can get to be a little lengthy. So I will say that. But yeah, so he does work. And so I wanted to share that with you, his work. And he's actually going to the United Nations right now, his legal team, so he can get out of prison because he's on death row. It's like he says it's a slow death because there's no like date necessarily for him to be murdered by the state, more state-sanctioned violence. However, his claims to innocence, and they say that this was politically motivated rather than anything he did criminally. So we will keep you up to date. And I'm going to put some stuff in YouTube. He does interviews with podcasters. Mark Lamont Hill, was doing like a weekly check-in with him for some period of time. And so, yeah. Then I wanted to share with you the Bandung Conference, and I'll give you some resources so you guys can look further into it. But basically, I think I've already said this before. I'm going to say it again. This happened in Bandung, Indonesia. And it was 29 countries, Black and brown nations. So the people that could not come were white people. If y'all don't like that I say that, my bad. Get used to it, I suppose, because the white people were the ones who imposed these racial categories anyway. So like, for me to say that, like, oh, that's not what it is, it's more complex than that. It's like, well, yeah, okay. And that's not what y'all did. That's not what we did. That Europeans didn't make it complex. They didn't make it nuanced. And so for the discussions on colonialism and on decolonization, I don't feel the need to do that. So yeah, European nations, dominant nations, white nations were not allowed to be at the Bandung Conference. And I hope that you guys see the this auto, man, people are clowning on my auto, by the way. People are like, I love how your stuff be auto correcting and just looks common. I'm like, man, I don't know what to do about that. Just try to move my computer, move my head. I don't know. Anyways, so I hope that you listen to the speech that was given at the conference when the leader of Indonesia kind of started it off, and I will put that in, again, the resources. And I wanted to read to you from, let me share my screen so you guys can see it. Here was the 10-point final communique on April 24th, 1955 that came after the conference, that come out of the conference. So the essence of the Bandung spirit is, all that I need is for peace. You fight today, so that the children of the world can live and grow and laugh and play. And the 10 points are respect for fundamental human rights and for the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. That was in 1945 UN Charter. That was passed after World War II, when we needed to start rethinking empire, essentially. Especially because, Germany was trying to be a larger empire. And it's like, oh, well, if you're admitting it now about Germany being that empires are bad, then what about y'all? And we need to move to decolonize. And then, like, for example, France made it easier for other countries in Africa, for example, 1/3 of Africa, that they had colonized to decolonize, because they were using all of their resources in Algeria. So we can start to see that the more people that fight, the harder it is for the colonizers to win. And that includes the colonizers themselves. And so we as colonizers, the white people, we need to take up arms against the colonizers as well. That's part of the movement. And we need to make these connections, because that was how Algeria could win independence. And that's how other nations could win independence as well, by this fight in Algeria. So anyways, I would love to go more in the history of these particular moments, because it's all very contextual, and we will, don't you worry. We got my whole life left ahead of me. Um, so respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations. Number three, recognition of the equality of all races and of the equality of all nations, large and small. Abstention from intervention or interference in the internal affairs of another country. And when I think of equality and I think of the thing that I drew, and I think of how the civil rights movement got like mistook for like integration when it was really equality. So like African Americans, they weren't fighting for integration. They were like, no, y'all white people can stay all the way over there. But we do want equality. And it's that, not the sense of like integration means progress. Integration equals decolonialism. Like that is a myth. Like because that requires white people to, you know, must be somehow involved and must be the ones to actively decolonize off of the ideologies and the worldview of the colonizer, which is colonial. So you see the myths and the mirrors that Marx talks about, right? He talks about smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors. Abstention from intervention or interference in the internal affairs of another country. Respect for the right of each nation to defend itself singly or collectively in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations. 6, abstention from the use of arrangements of collective defense to serve the particular interests of any of the big powers. Abstention by any country from exerting pressures on other countries. Refraining from acts or threats of aggression or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any country. Settlement of all international disputes by peaceful means such as negotiation, conciliation, arbitration, or judicial settlement, as well as other peaceful means of the parties' own choice in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, promotion of mutual interest and cooperation, and respect for justice and international obligations. And so that's what came out of the Bandung Conference, along with the non-aligned movement, which I wanted to show you a map of. Here's a map of it. So it started in with, well, I think actually the non-alignment first took place in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. Here it is right here. Yeah. 1961. So this is, again, the year that Fanon died, but it was still the context of decolonization. Yugoslavia is where it took place, but it involved Egypt, India, Indonesia, and Ghana. So this was where the Bandung Conference took place, was Bandung, Indonesia. Okay, so yeah, so right now the non-alignment movement is, I think, in Uganda, the headquarters is, but I will go back to, I had to look that up. Sorry. I forgot. I thought I had the resource ready, but you know, it's rough out here sometimes. So, and again, I don't recommend Wikipedia as a source for information, but this is superficial. Remember, you guys got to do the work at the end of the day. So it's 120 countries that are not formally aligned with or against any major power bloc. So it was founded in the context of the Cold War and as something, you know, principles agreed at by the Bandung Conference. So there's, again, all these member states, and then the observer states are in light blue. So all of Africa, essentially, besides a few. This is the Sub-Saharan Morocco. Next was an observer state. So anyways, that's the aligned movement that kind of came out of the Bandung Conference to say that we will not be aligned with any dominant power bloc institutions, and we have the right to sovereignty and to, you know, use these principles in order to fight for continuing fight of things like the Monroe Doctrine, which was the doctrine from President Monroe that said that, you know, Latin America cannot be colonized by Europeans. And then that opened up. So like, if there's any foreigners in Latin America, we have the right to protect, you know, provide security because it's a direct threat to the United States. Obviously, what we knew was that in history, the Monroe Doctrine was then used to go and ensure there was no type of unaligned takeover, political takeover, social takeover of, and what I mean, unaligned anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist governmental takeovers. And there was a lot of coup d'etat, financed to some degree or directly by the United States of America to ensure that those left political movements, those progressive political movements did not come into fruition. Or even if they did, you know, they died out by military force few years after. But they would say, you know, there's Russian infiltration, and that goes against this Monroe Doctrine. There's Chinese infiltration. I mean, they're doing it right now. That's what they use, the Monroe Doctrine. That's what Trump was talking about, to go into Venezuela and say, well, they're communists, and that means that there's some sort of infiltration. Like, people can't just be socialists because it's the right way, right? It's the way to make sure that everybody is provided in a society for what they need. It has to be influenced by China or Russia or these enemy forces, Iran, etc. And so these are how these laws kind of work to get in the way of these decolonization movements or freedom movements through the glue that holds us all together, which is socialism. Now, I will say a caveat to that is, in the Bandung Conference, if you guys please do watch that introduction, is there was capitalists at the Bandung Conference. So it is more nuanced than just saying, oh, socialism is anti-capitalist. As you guys know, in history, that a lot of these economic systems have worked alongside each other. Just we're talking about the dominant one. And like in China, there's capitalism in China. There's billionaires in China. I don't think we should have billionaires personally, but I'm just saying, like, we are very misinformed. So about what socialism could look like and all the models and all of that. And so, in China, a lot of the major national industries, a lot of the major industries are nationalized. And then that protects the land, right? It protects the worker as a lot more than cutthroat capitalism in a private market would when you're talking about natural resources. When you're talking about services, goods and services, those hotels and small mom and pop shops and things like that, those would be privatized to ensure that, people can survive without having to pay a shit ton of taxes to the government. And so there are a lot of models that we can use from history and even currently in socialist nations to help our people out in the United States. Because, when 80% of the population is demanding, or I shouldn't say that, when a majority is demanding things like healthcare for all, free higher education, loan forgiveness across the board, defunding the police, at least the military, 50%, please. I like the Green Party. One of their tenets is to defund the U.S. military by 50%. All obviously defund any aid, any type of relationship with Israel as an apartheid, ethnocentric state, etc. And so I think that I've made it clear enough for today, what this decolonial movement was in the world. So it was the national, pretty short, it was the nationalization most of the time by violence, unless they sided with the capitalists rather quickly. And by they, I mean the natives. What does Fanon call them? The ex-natives or the neo-natives or something, which he calls the bourgeoisie natives, who kind of take over power in these new nations. And if they align with the capitalist class, then we have the same problem being repeated or reproduced, whether or not the colonists are there themselves. If their companies are there themselves, or their extraction of natural resources and the exploitation of labor is there through their privatized companies, then what are we even doing right now? But that's for a different day. But yeah, so this was the nationalization of all these countries, the sovereignty that was gained by military force. I think that's the most important part that Fanon wanted to highlight. Not only what psychological harm colonization does on Native people, but also the movement to decolonization requires violence. It requires force. It requires organized effort. It requires some sort of glue that glues us together. And it requires a movement that where we leave all of our petty disputes behind, even all of our historical disputes behind, and we mobilize together around a cause for liberation for all, always. And so I will end there. And it looks like I said, I wasn't really sure how this was going to go. But I think what I'll do then is, for my next episode next week, we'll stick to the text a little bit more, and I'll try to stay. The examples are interesting. The historical context is vital, but the text is what we're here for. And also to think about how to engage our students in texts like these that, and how do we handle, students when they're asking some tough questions? I think that's what I want to start thinking about when we're thinking about, and you know, argue with me. I don't know. Do you guys think that these texts should be? I mean, my argument is yes, the text should be taught in high school, especially when kids want it. They're thirsty for knowledge. They're thirsty to understand the truth. They know that what they're getting taught is bullshit. Um, they don't want to be in school. They don't want to read, and they start reading some shit like this. I guarantee they're gonna want to read, especially the most marginalized, especially people that can relate. It's like, oh, I have these thoughts. I have these thoughts often. And like one of my students said in the class the other day, she said what she realized that she hadn't realized before my class is that she's like, the whole time it was them, because she is Chicana, Spanish and English speaking. And she said, my whole life I blamed myself. And all I thought I had to do was, learn better English, speak better English, only speak English in school, and that would be enough. And then she said, and then she like, the whole time I realized it was you, and the whole time it was them. And so, that can only happen through critical discourses, critical thought, critical conversations. And so let's keep doing those. And in the meantime, remember, we're working towards boycotting tests. We're working towards calling for general strikes. We could either be leaders of those, or we can follow. So if somebody's calling for a general strike, teachers unions need to not be scared, or we need to work outside of those as a big picture. So that's very simple things for me, thinking of ways that would actually do something, because otherwise we're just on the hamster wheel if we're not willing to act. And so those are some of the major acts. If I were to think, how do we get rid of House File 802 in Iowa? How do we get rid of this library law? How do we get rid of the 3 strikes law that, again, no one asked for in Iowa? Well, maybe some MAGA, but maybe Israel. I'm not sure who the fuck asked for it, but excuse me. But how do we ensure that ICE can't invade our communities? We strike. We boycott the tests. We refuse to give tests. We refuse to come to work. We refuse to play the role that was imposed on us by society. It's the only way. And we're going to keep working, and we're going to keep mobilizing, and, free us. Take care, and I will see you next week.